everybody out there. Welcome to the Tuesday, May 18th meeting of the Charlotte City Council Intergovernmental Relations Committee meeting. I am one of your vice chairs, Braxton Winston.
I am your other co-chair, Tarek Bakari, and with us
vice chair, yeah.
online is Councilmember Phipps.
Greg Phipps, at-large committee member.
And then
And the staff that we have in the room and then online, if you have anybody.
Dana Fenton with the City Manager's Office.
Hey, and Donata Jackson, Office of Constituent Services.
Do we have any guests joining us today, Mr. Fenton?
I know that there are several on there, a couple from Kilpatrick Townsend, our state contract lobbying firm. Amanda, would you like to introduce yourself, please? Then followed by, if John, you could follow her.
Absolutely. Good afternoon, everyone. Amanda Honaker with Kilpatrick Townsend, contract lobbyist on behalf of the city.
Good afternoon, members of council. John E. Strickland, contract lobbyist with Patrick Townsend on behalf of the city of Charlotte.
Hello, y'all. So it was lucky to see some of y'all in town for the golf tournament last week, was it? 2 weeks ago now? What is time? But I think since we were all busy, we all had a late night last night. Why don't we get down to business and run the committee meeting? Mr. Fenton, why don't you, we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Winston. The first item on the agenda today is the state legislative update. If staff could bring up the presentation, I'd appreciate that. We have quite a bit going on at the General Assembly. I think we all know that they started their work on January 13th, and last week was the week that we call crossover week, and that is the week where most bills have to be out of their house of origin before May 13th, or they're not going to be able to be considered any further this session, and with the exception, of course, of appropriations and revenue bills. And there was a lot of activity last week. They went through something they call Vote-a-Rama, where they have many, many votes during the days, and they were able to get through it. So far this year, the level of activity has been high, as I said. About nearly 1,700 bills have been filed total. About 35% of the bills that were introduced in the House have passed the House, and about 22% have passed the Senate. Now, I would not expect all those bills to be enacted into law, because the actual number of pieces of legislation actually enacted are somewhere between 200 and 300. So that number will come down considerably. Next slide, please. What the General Assembly is really focused on now, appropriations. In the next few weeks, the Senate will be releasing their budget proposal. Probably, I'd say more along the lines of a late May, perhaps next week or the week after with Memorial Day. The House, we would perceive they would probably receive the budget sometime in early June, and that would be followed by negotiations between the two chambers. And so there should be a bill going to the governor's desk by mid to late June. But we also have a second approach.
Dana, real quick.
Yes, sir.
What's the? Do you know have any insights into if they will sign a budget this year into law?
Yeah, that seems to be something that changes with the weather, Mr. Bakari. And so right now there's really no prediction as to what they'll do. But 2 years ago, when they had to pass, the House and Senate had to pass quite a few of what they call the mini budgets that covered only one area of the state budget overall. That seems to be a strategy that they would be ready to go back to if they need to. The next one, we have another appropriations measure working its way through the House and Senate right now. It has to do with the COVID-19 relief. The American Rescue Plan that was passed back in March put some more money back into state governments, and about $6.5 billion of federal funds from that act would be appropriated through this. And these are going through for programs that for the most part are for dedicated, that are for specific sources of expenditure, like emergency rental assistance and those types of programs. At the same time, the state is receiving some funding through the state fiscal recovery fund, sort of similar to what the local governments are receiving as well. So that work is, there is a bill that's already passed the Senate. The House Appropriations Committee will be taking it up this week, and we're not expecting any sort of conflict on getting that bill through. I think people understand that it has to go for certain uses, so there's not going to be a lot of debate on that. And next slide, please. And issues that we're watching, some of the big issues that the General Assembly is taking on. One area that has come to fruition this year is criminal justice police reform. And there's 6 bills that have passed either the House or Senate. The first 5 bills, the House bills, are really, the titles are self-explanatory. For the most part, those are very short bills. And those are also recommendations of the House Select Committee on Community Relations, Law Enforcement, and Justice. And locally, State Representatives Carla Cunningham and Carolyn Logan served on that House Select Committee along with Co-Chair Vakari. And those recommendations for those 5 bills passed by very wide margin. It was bipartisan support for those measures. And then the last bill, Senate Bill 300, that is an omnibus bill. It encompasses all the provisions, for the most part, of the House bills, and then it has some other measures in there. And a note I want to bring up to you is that Senate Democrats work very, very closely with Senate Republicans on the issue of police recordings and their disclosure. And so there is language in there is that it's a presumption that there would be immediate disclosure of police recordings to the immediate family in cases of death or serious bodily injury within 5 days, unless the Superior Court rules otherwise. Right now, the process for getting those recordings released is that someone has to go to the Superior Court. It could be the immediate family going to the court. It could be the local government. It could be the press. It could be many others who go to the court to ask for recordings to be disclosed. In this case, this is a turnaround from the 2016 law. By basically, it would put in a presumption that it would be released within 5 days. Next slide, please. More issues we're watching. Municipal election schedule. Last month we reported on some progress that was being made on that issue. There appears to be now I guess I call it an understanding that perhaps the House and the Senate will pass legislation that will provide flexibility to cities to move their elections from 2021 to 2022. It would be not a piece of legislation, we understand, that would absolutely put the elections in 22, but it would give the option to the local governments. And Mr. Winston, I see you'd like to ask a question, perhaps?
Yeah, so, well, you just said there's not going to be a legislative fix because there won't be legislation.
There will be legislation, but it will give that option to the affected local governments to move their elections to 2022.
So what is the legal kind of outlook on the constitutionality? Because that's part of there's 2 issues here with elections. There's legality, but there's constitutionality in terms of the one person, one vote. So what is the legal? I don't really. Maybe we get some details about what that language is that you're saying. What is this flexibility? But what is from what? For instance, when we talk to Mr. Baker, the legal opinion would be that the census numbers and that kind of standard has to do with the Constitution and not just law.
I could probably take this because I've been pretty immersed in this. So I don't even have a position on it, to be quite honest. I'll just tell you what I know and what I've heard so far. So I think there's 2 points to this. Point one is, it seems like there is starting to be consensus, as Dana said, in the Senate and House, and the Senate is going to more than likely bring forth a bill that will give us choice. They essentially won't weigh in and say, you have to do this or this, which I know some of us were hoping that we might have some explicit guidance like that. And it will be more like municipalities get to decide for themselves what they will do. And then, as I've heard it, and again, this isn't validated yet until we see it, but just as from the conversations I've heard, they will essentially lay out 3 acceptable options to them. Have it this year, have it next year, or have it the year after that. So that's the political kind of bill legislation piece. The other piece is, what about the constitutionality of it? And the constitutionality of it is pretty clear that it is unconstitutional to have the election this year if we have the data from the census. The one person, one vote rule is indeed compromised there. I think the big asterisk next to that is we are in extraordinary circumstances, and I think the General Assembly is recognizing that, and they're saying, by saying you can make your own choice, that they are cool with any of the 3 of those options. So I think it comes down to a political question. I've talked with lawyers across the state, and the lawyers essentially say, if someone, there is no scenario in the minds, unanimously, all the ones that I talked to, that anyone would come in after the election who was unhappy with the results and be able to have any ability to sue to change the election. It would merely be, did somebody want to sue ahead of time, and were they successful in actually getting it changed? So with all that being said, it kind of changes the dynamic when the General Assembly, the group that we would be most concerned about how they would react if we decided, told us, okay, you can do whatever it is, and because of these circumstances that are unprecedented, do either of those as you will. So I think what it's going to come down to for all of us municipalities that have elections this year, given if that is the direction they take, it becomes a political question for us, and puts us in a tough position, which is, are we prepared to, in front of the voters, essentially vote ourselves an extra 1 or 2 years when we don't have the backstop of saying, well, the General Assembly would say that's not okay. So I mean, that's me as best as I can state it down the middle without taking a position, the situation we're in right now.
Well, I think again, you highlighted, yes, there's a political nature of this, but you can't underscore, what undergirds all that is constitutionality. And it sure sounds like we should be prepared for a constitutional, if not a crisis, a conflict, because that is what is most important. That is what rises above the legislature. That's what rises above municipalities, what rises above whatever the executive thinks. It's going to be whether the courts determine, what is constitutional and what isn't. So I feel like we're not, even with, it sounds like what Mr. Fenton and Mr. Bukhari are saying, even when the legislature makes its decision or gives us whatever guidance they're going to give, it's not going to resolve the issue.
No, to be clear, I think if things go the way they're going right now, it is completely up to this body of 11 folks to decide, completely.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
It's not, even if the decision to have it or not, ultimately the decision whether something is, if an election is constitutional or not, that is going to determine
Well,
the
you
final
have the
arbiter.
constitutionality on one side, you have the pressure of self-dealing additional years onto a term beyond what is mandated. So there is no good scenario. I think that's why the General Assembly is recognizing that and saying local control as we normally want, and we won't get mad at you if you do one or the other. I literally don't even have a personal opinion on this other than just saying, like, now we're at that spot where we were kind of hoping we wouldn't be, which is we've now got to deliberate on this. And I think that's going to be a pretty big shocker to 43 municipalities that are going to have to make these decisions one at a time. But knowing that the General Assembly is okay with whatever we decide is a big kind of, tailwind for us in this scenario at a minimum.
Well, we take an oath to defend the Constitution, and not the General Assembly. So I hope we wouldn't be forced or even think about doing anything, making decisions that are unconstitutional.
No, like I said, we do whatever the will of the body is with the blessing of the General Assembly.
Mr. Phipps has a question.
Yes, Mr. Phipps.
Oh, yeah, my question dealt with an earlier slide, so.
Sure.
We can wait to get through all of this and
No,
we can
I
go
think,
back to it.
it's only the three of us. Do you have any more? I think we're
Okay.
good on this one, so please, go ahead.
Yeah, I had a question when it was talking about the releasing body cam footage that will be within 5 days unless the Superior Court ruled otherwise. Does that mean that somebody would have to petition the court not to release?
Yes, Mr. Phipps, that is true. What the legislation says right now is that the law enforcement agency could petition the Superior Court to not release it.
Oh, okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Please continue, Mr. Fenton.
Well, thank you. And just to finish up the election schedule issue, you are right, Mr. Bakari. There are no details yet on what that legislation that hasn't been shared with anybody, but we suspect it'll be happening next few weeks.
I think to Mr. Winston's point, since we're kind of a little bit ahead of the 8 ball here in our knowledge of what could be coming, it would be a good idea for you to engage the city attorney in a full, because I don't know that he's going to be able to come up with kind of the angles of this necessary on the fly. So to give him as much heads up notice as possible to start analyzing the scenarios, because I'm sure as the council starts discussing this, they're going to have a lot of questions.
That's true. Will do. The next issue, this is the increased housing opportunities bill that we did discuss some last month. This is the one that deals with the middle housing issue, would make middle housing a state mandate for local governments. The bill, the Edwards bill, Senate Bill 349, did receive a hearing in Senate Finance and was subsequently re-referred to the Senate Rules Committee without a committee vote taking place. This one's on life support, I would say. And he did receive a hearing, listened to it, and there were many, many questions, especially from members of his own party. So there are definitely some issues that are bipartisan on this. The next issue, we do have a couple of development-related bills that we're working on right now. Just wanted to let you know about this. The first bill, House Bill 291, deals with building code, with the review timeframes, things like that. The second bill, House Bill 853, deals with more of the development process, the horizontal development, the water lines, the driveways, the roads, and so forth. And it has a lot of the same issues as the previous bill. And what we're doing with these, we're working in tandem with the League of Municipalities and other local governments and analyzing the bills and trying to get some feedback to the sponsors.
Mr. Fenton, I don't remember I was just looking, I can't find it, but I brought to your attention the bill number that you were going to do some research into that.
821.
821, are you going to do that?
I've already done that. I was going to give you a call on that.
Is that for anyone is interested, 821 was a bill, among other things, that basically mandated across the state of North Carolina that no comp plans under development can house any references to legislation that is required in the future and not currently granted. So I had heard about it. I went and did a little bit of homework, and I asked you, given the relevance of that, was there anything you found of that having legs, or did it die?
The bill has legs. It's been re-referred to the House Local Government Land Use Planning and Development Committee that's headed by Representative Brody. The bill in its current form does not contain the language that you were referring to, but certainly it could be used as a vehicle to do something like that. But as of right now, there's no language in there to that effect. It was dealing, Representative McNeely from Iredell County was trying to deal with a very local situation up in that county.
Got it.
And so, but it does not contain language of that sort right now.
Okay, thank you.
Next slide, please. A few other bills we're watching. Mr. Winston brought this first bill up last month. It has to do with the requirement for destruction of firearms. In this case, legislation has been introduced to require the destruction of firearms that are used in committing an assault against a law enforcement officer or any other offense that leads to bodily injury or death to the victim. This is a very narrowly crafted bill in order to get around known opposition to these types of measures. It was requested, I think you and I talked or we communicated in some form, Mr. Winston. This was requested by the Gaston County District Attorney. And apparently it's supported by other county attorneys around the state. So this bill did pass the House last week. It's now over the Senate. And we'll keep on monitoring this one. The last bill on the list here is a pretty interesting bill. Bring back business to downtown. This was put in by Representative Moffitt from Henderson County, I believe, or Hendersonville. And for those of you who don't know Representative Moffitt, he's previously served in the General Assembly for a couple of terms, I think from 2011 to 2014. And he ran, and he's now occupying the seat that former Representative Chuck McGrady is occupying. And he has a specialty in bills involving ABC-related issues. And this is a bill he introduced because of the situation he saw out there when he went to street festivals in many towns and cities, that there would be vendors on the street, mobile vendors selling alcoholic drinks, and people could take those drinks anywhere. Sometimes you had seating, sometimes you didn't. So what he saw was that the brick and mortar establishments bordering these areas were not open at the same time. Or the people who were getting drinks in there had to stay in the establishment. They couldn't walk around. So in his view, he wanted to try to bring parity to this situation. And it's something we'll be watching. It's a discretionary authority for local governments. It's not something, of course, that you would have to implement, but we'll keep on watching this. This should get some attention, I think, over in the Senate, and it has passed the House. Next slide, please. And let's get to the city's legislative agenda. The Charlotte Firefighters Retirement System Bill. This is the legislation that would help us to help sustain the system going forward and to make some other technical changes. It got through its first committee last week, and it's now in the Senate Rules Committee, which is normal. This is just a prelude to being voted on the floor of the House. The floor of the Senate. This is not a situation where a bill is being sent there because of a lack of support.
So this bill was stuck for a while. So you're saying it got unstuck?
Well, it went to the pension. It got through the Pensions Committee last week. Yeah. And then it got to the floor of the Senate, and it was sent back to committee. There are some questions that we have from staff about some of the changes that are being proposed, and so we're going to be meeting with staff to try to hopefully resolve those issues.
Okay. Keep us posted on that if we need to rally support around it.
All right. The second issue, subpoena power. There are both statewide and local bills that were introduced on this subject. None of them moved before crossover, so they're not going to be able to be considered furthermore this session. And then we have a couple of budgetary issues among our requests. First has to do with the digital divide, and there are two bills that would make some changes, appropriations in one case, to provide more funding for broadband around the state. The second bill, the House bill, is pretty interesting. It would appropriate about $800 million of the American Resource Plan American Rescue Plan dollars that are coming from the federal government for broadband. There are some other changes in there that are needed in order to make sure that a county like Mecklenburg would be eligible for it, but it certainly seems to be an opportunity out there.
There was something that I saw about digital divide bill that failed to make it out. Do you have any information on that? Something about municipal broadband networks or anything like that?
Mr. Winston, I should know that one. I just had not followed that one. Actually, I believe that there might have been an appropriation in there or a revenue source. So it might not have been subject to crossover, but I will check that for you. The last issue, the North Carolina Airport Improvement Program. This is always a budget issue, and we'll be watching this when the budget comes out in just the next few weeks. And next slide, please. And looking ahead, you've got your committee meeting next.
Real quick, on
Yes,
the
sir.
last one. So can you do us a favor? And as we're continuing to track the SB 517 and HB 947, around these bills, as people testify, as people bring forth use cases and things, can you start to try to gather us up the breadcrumb trail of what implementation would look like if these pass, what people are thinking? Because obviously a lot of this stuff is more rural than urban related. However, a lot of this stuff meets our criteria and objective around bridging the urban-rural divide, around the 74 corridor, autonomous trucking, and 5G corridors, and then just broader digital divide amongst those more rural counties along that swath. So understanding that, I think, would be helpful as we continue to have dialogues. We had a dialogue last week with the Wilmington City Council, or not, the Wilmington City staff in economic development and other places, plus some private sector folks, and then SpaceX, utilizing the Starlink things that we're seeing in Swain County. So there are pockets of excitement around this, but for us to achieve something extraordinary with this, we've got to do more than just track the bills at this point. We've got to get involved in them and figure out how to make them better, more effective tools.
Understood. Be glad to.
Thank you.
Next slide, please. Oh, we're on the next slide. Looking ahead, your next meeting is on June 21. And over the next several weeks, budget issues are going to just going to dominate everything at the General Assembly. And there's more things in the appropriations bills that we always look for. We need to make sure that that the funding that we expect to come to the city from the state, like for the Powell bill, for example, and funding for CATS is also going to be in the budget as well. And then there's other things in the budget you always need to look for. So we're going to be playing a lot of defense when the budget comes out. And just in general, we're going to be playing a lot of defense over the next 7 to 8 weeks. Certainly with a lot of bills being passed by the House going over the Senate, and vice versa. Again, we're going to be needing to work with folks up there on these things. So, co-chairs, that completes my presentation. Any further questions?
No.
Okay, great.
Phipps?
Phipps, you got anything?
I had a question.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, now, Mr. Fenton, did I understand you to say that both companion bills dealing with the increasing housing opportunities are on life support?
Actually, Mr. Phipps, I'd say Senate Bill 349 is in that category. The other bill, which is identical to Senate Bill 349, was filed in the House, and that's still in committee. So they have not had a hearing on it, and I couldn't tell you right now whether that bill is likely to move forward or not.
Thank you.
Okay, next up is the federal legislative update. If staff could bring up that presentation. And we do have some updates for you on issues related to the city's legislative priorities and also another look ahead. Under the position of transportation and infrastructure, I think you all know that the president proposed and legislate. Well, there's a proposal out there to appropriate up to $2.25 trillion. I'm sorry, we're going from billions to trillions here.
What's above trillion?
Yeah, it's $1 trillion. So, to modernize the nation's infrastructure, that's a proposal. All different sorts of infrastructure, transportation, broadband, waterways, housing, et cetera, et cetera. And right now we know that the Republicans have countered with a $568 billion plan. One of the senators from West Virginia is heading up that plan. And there's probably going to be more negotiations taking place before anything gets done. And I did read something yesterday where the president has basically said, yes, he's more than willing to negotiate with Republicans on this. So more to come. And again, as far as timeframes, we would not look for anything to be done on this until late summer, fall timeframe. The digital divide, I just want to provide you an update here. Of course, that's addressed in the American Jobs Plan of 2021, but a couple of programs that were created by the December 2020 emergency relief measure and the American Rescue Plan that just was passed 2 months ago. The Emergency Broadband Benefit Program, this is for low-income families to be able to get a subsidy to connect to the internet. They have started to receive applications. That's the Federal Communications Commission. And we're working with the Communications Office to help get that word out there to people. That's not something we're directly managing, of course, but at least we try to help get some word out there
I
about it.
think this is not just communications, but if we work with, I know Bruce Clark and Digital Charlotte, the Digital Navigators program that we're in with Mecklenburg County.
E2D.
I think this might be a intergovernmental kind of approach, perhaps.
All right, sounds good.
What's the timeline around what we can expect with FCC rules, with, I mean, just understanding what, I mean, I know a lot of it is waiting on the negotiation, but however, like, do we expect to, do you have any expectations on when we get more details on what's coming?
On what's coming?
Digital divide related.
Yeah, you know, on the broadband benefit program, just so you know, that was passed, enacted law in late December, and now this is the fifth month of the year. So they were able to get something going in about four months. And in terms of the second one having to do with the Emergency Connectivity Fund, that was enacted 2 months ago. They just came out with the proposed rules.
So that's been approved.
It has not been approved. Those are just proposed rules at this point. It will have to be approved, and I'm not sure when it will be approved.
Okay, so, but that is approved separately from the American Jobs Plan that also has broadband programs within it, right?
That's correct. Yeah, these sub-bullets are two different programs.
So we should expect in the relative near term of weeks, if not months, to see about the details on this FCC piece of the Emergency Connectivity Fund.
Yes, sir.
But then it's a total unknown about the broadband pieces and digital divide pieces of the American Jobs Plan at this point, which we wouldn't.
Oh, yeah, you're right.
Total, right?
Yeah, right.
Okay, got it.
Yeah,
All right,
you've
just making
got,
sure.
Yeah, you've got bits and pieces for broadband in all these emergency relief.
I think my same point stands from the state level stuff, which is on the digital divide topics. I think, you know, this is something that all of us have a lot of passion for. So really laying out all the different pieces and the timelines and what the triggers are we're all watching for,
Right.
so that when you say a trigger has hit, we all know exactly what that means in our critical path of kind of connecting these dots.
Yeah, it's a good point. Thank you. And I would just say on the Emergency Connectivity Fund, that's the funding that would go to schools and libraries to help them, students and others to connect to the internet.
Oh, oh, got it. So that is completely separated for schools and libraries.
Yes, it is.
Okay,
It is.
all right,
It is completely
understood.
separate,
Sorry.
but it's still, it does work for an issue that the city council worked on last year.
Sure.
With CMS. Okay, next slide, please.
I had a question.
Yes, sir.
On the applications that are being received for, I guess, assistance for low-income families, is there an upper limit? How much of a stipend could they be eligible for?
Yeah, Mr. Phipps, the stipend, the subsidy would be, what I've read, it would be approximately $50 per month for a family. And I've seen those before. I'd be glad to send a link out to the program on the FCC website for you. And you provide much more detail than what I can provide right now.
Thank you.
Okay, the next issue, comprehensive immigration reform. We talked a little bit about this last month. Immigration reform legislation was introduced in the House. It hasn't moved since last month, but it is something that the House is very interested in passing. The COVID-19 guidelines report, I was coming into last week, I was thinking I'm just going to say, hey, same thing as last month, but of course with the CDC guidance last week, revised guidance on face masks, just thought you all might like to know that the order for wearing masks in airports and other forms of public transportation is still in place. It's still in effect. Just want everybody to know that. And then next slide, please. Looking ahead, the House will be working on federal appropriations measures, FY 2022 measures, in June and July. In June, they'll go through what they call markups in committees to take the legislation and conform it to what they'd like to see, and then probably sometime in July, you'll see the bulk of the legislation pass the House. And then sometime in the fall, the Senate will get to work on it, and sometime during the fall to early winter, we should be seeing appropriations bill for FY 22. And then finally, or last two ones, House Community Project Funding. We talked a little bit about this last month. There were some projects, requested funding that the city put in to Congresswoman Adams's office. And right now, those requests are being scrutinized by Appropriations Committee staff. They're very, very sensitive to how when earmarks went away back in the late 2000s about some of the issues that they found at the time. They want to make sure that those issues don't arise again. And then finally, the Senate will soon be releasing guidelines for its members to submit their funding request as well. It took a while to get to this point for them. There was a lot of discussion in the Republican caucus about it, but I think that probably what kind of moved them to go ahead and support these things, funding requests, is that the ranking member of the Appropriations Committee was very adept at getting earmarks back in the 2000s for his home state. So he said, regardless of what you all decide, I'm going to go ahead and request them. So that's that. And Mr. Chairman, actually co-chairs, I'd be glad to answer any questions. That completes my presentation.
I think the only thing, this is great. I agree with Mr. Bakari personally, that we should definitely keep up with tracking, but we need to figure out how do we be involved in some of these things more, and how do we as council members plug into that. And I think we've been exploring that together, Mr. Fenton. I think one thing I would ask to Mr. Bakari's point about coordinating with Mr. Baker, I don't know what's going to happen in the next couple weeks, but I imagine the June strategy session, the first of the month, where that we should be prepared to have a council discussion about the potential, potential decisions that we have to make and the legal and constitutional ramifications.
I think we need to, based on where I have heard in conversations where this is in the maturity of like it becoming a bill and coming out in public, I think we need to have this conversation like now, like immediately.
Well, I hear that. Our next full council discussion about it would be our strategy session in 2 weeks. It would be 2 weeks, right? Because we have
something next week.
We have a business meeting, but I think we should ask Mr. Fenton to talk to Mr. Jones and Mr. Baker and the mayor potentially.
I've given the manager a heads up on this, as I've learned it in real time over the last week or so. So, yeah, I think that's probably a manager discussion with you, Mr. Fenton, and then
an attorney.
Yeah, totally. I think to learn from our kind of pain points of the last couple months, like if we could get everyone to list out all their questions offline and hand those to the attorney and allow him to do homework and stuff and present back. So we don't waste a cycle of a meeting with people saying what they want to know. And that way, I think that would be like, that way we hit the ground running, we have a policy-based discussion on it. And then if there are follow-ups that occur, they're 1 or 2, they're not 50. And I think that would be ideal from just a time management perspective.
Agreed. Mr. Phipps, you were trying to say something?
Oh, yeah, I had a question about the House earmarks or whatever. Is there such a list of what those requests are?
Yes, I understand that the Appropriations Committee has put those requests online, and I'd be glad to send that link to you.
I think he was talking about the list that we sent. The list that we
Oh,
sent.
the list that we sent. Oh, okay, yeah. Those are on Congresswoman Adams' site, and I'd be glad to get a link for those to you as well.
Okay. Yeah. Another question I had about the subpoena power. Did it get any further this session than it has in the past, or what?
No, it got less further. It's something that we pushed super hard within the last 4 years, and it probably came to its pinnacle 2 years ago, where we got it as far as we could figure it out, and then that's when it hit essentially the buzzsaw of there is no scenario by which a local bill is going to be allowed to make it happen, because it'll immediately get forced to a statewide bill, and in the current makeup, there's no statewide support. So I think what we'll just see is we hit that pinnacle, we took it as far as you could take it, and now we're on the kind of decline of people will keep trying, but the people who have run it down, unless there's some kind of substantial change in the General Assembly as a body, it's a non-starter at this point.
Okay.
And as a side note, I just might add, I don't necessarily think it's a partisan thing as much as like Republicans are against it. I think we made a really compelling case for it 2 years ago. I think what the problem was is they all said, yep, I could see that. I could see how that is meaningful, particularly when the chief of police says, you know, I'm for it because my folks are required to show up anyway. It can only do us good. I think where we hit our roadblock and then we couldn't go any further was there were others that, because there's no local bill option, again, you have to consider that, and it goes statewide, it was just this premise of not everyone who wants this is in that same boat. And there are differing views, there's differing sophistications of different municipalities in this. So at the end of the day, it was just like, if it was Charlotte alone and that was it, we probably could get it done. But it's just a catch-22 with there's no local option paired with there are different municipality situations that just make it a non-starter.
Wow.
You have any other questions, Mr. Phipps?
No, that was it for me. Thanks for that explanation. I guess, you know, each of our legislative requests year after year would probably include another attempt, huh?
Council's will. Anything else, Mr. Bakari?
Just that I love you and appreciate you, Mr. Winston
Likewise, brother.
and Mr. Phipps, but just you two.
With that, motion to close.
Second? All in favor?
Ah.
All right.